Good afternoon, members. May I welcome you to all members and officers and invitees to the Learning Communities Overview and Scrutiny meeting. Just to confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that we have not received any notifications or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind you that this meeting is being webcast. Therefore, please turn off your mobile phones and ensure you speak clearly into your microphones. Can I also remind all members to sign the attendance register and confirm if any apologies have been received for this meeting? Thank you very much. Can we move on then to... Oh, sorry, apologies, please, Geraint. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, we've got apologies from Councillors Cathy Evans, Richard Overton, Dave Thomas and Raymond Williams, and also from Ms Lorna Redmond.
Okay. Can we move on then to item 2, declarations of interest, and I'd like to bring in Tim James, our legal officer, for some advice, please. Please, Tim.
Thank you, Chair and members. I don't anticipate any declarations, members, but if I can just explain my thinking behind that. In relation to item 5 on the agenda, which is the draft self-evaluation report and the scrutiny of that, I understand that there may be some schools, individual schools mentioned in the body of the report, but bearing in mind that the report is looking at the strategy and whether it's fit for purpose on a borough-wide basis, then in my view that doesn't mean that there should be any need to declare a personal interest in relation to that item. In relation to agenda item 6, which is the report back by the School Standards Monitoring Subcommittee, you will appreciate, members, that when the subcommittee itself met and considered individual schools, then personal only declarations of interest were made at that point by the members affected. Now, in relation to that report, members, my advice would be, unless there's any particular discussion around any of the individual schools in question when that item is reached, there shouldn't be any need to declare any interest in relation to that either. But if a particular school is discussed by this committee, then the members who are either connected to that school or have close relatives who are connected to that school or who are governors may then wish to declare a personal only interest. But as I say, only in relation to agenda item 6, I think, if the individual schools are discussed in any detail. And finally, Chair, can I just say that if there are any declarations later in the meeting, could they be recorded at the appropriate point in the attendance register? So I hope that's clear, Chair. I don't know if you or any of the members have any questions for me.
Any questions, members? That's fine. Can I thank you very much? Thank you. Right. Okay. Agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 23rd of March, and that's from pages 3 to 16. Are you happy to accept these minutes as a true record of the meeting? Yeah. And we move on then to agenda item 4, which is the action sheet. You can see there the action. The recommendations are to be sent to the relevant executive member as agreed at the meeting. And the recommendations were emailed to the executive member. We're still waiting a response. Okay, all happy? Yeah. We move on then to agenda item 5, which is the draft self-evaluation of the Torfaen Education Department, and the report is submitted by Sharon Davis, Head of Learning, who's with us, and Jan Jones as well, consultant. Thank you. Okay. So you have the report there in front of you, and on page 19 is the summary of the report. I think we'll take them all as sort of themes, and we'll start with the first area there, which is outcomes. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Karen?
Say before we move to outcomes, I'm a little concerned about the level of sort of basic errors in here, and I'll refer to page 79 as my what I consider to be my major example. I understand it's a draft document, But it actually says, if you look at paragraph 2 or paragraph 1 and a bit. 53? And it actually says, it's paragraph 2, the school's finance team have developed an in-house mutual absence scheme for schools. And then the third and fourth sentence say the school's finance committee have developed an in-house mutual absence scheme. So it's exactly virtually the same two things, one after the other. It's not exactly word for word, because it doesn't say in the first one this operate in 65% of schools, but it does in the second one. But you understand what I'm getting to, and I think for such an important document, I think we should be a bit more.
This is the very first draft. It hasn't been cleansed in that respect, so there'll be some things that are taken from. This is according to the new guidance. So we have been doing self-evaluation before that. So we've taken snippets out and we've cross-referenced. So we haven't cleansed it in that respect. So I totally take your comments on board. Because this is the very first draft where we pulled it all together.
That's what it looked like, cut and paste, basically.
It is. So there will be some of that tonight, because we haven't cleansed it yet. We're going through that process after this meeting, because we welcome the
I'd like to pick up the one that's sort of a catch-all, really. What changes were made to the self-evaluation report to ensure it was more evaluative?
There we go. But it's also through a management team as well. We've looked at the new Westin framework. We've gone through it in quite detail to look at the changes. We've then looked at what was our current self-evaluation, and then looked at the purpose of self-evaluation is for us to know how well we're doing. How do we know it? And then what do we need to do to further those improvements? And I totally take on board that our previous self-evaluation was too narrative. I think we listed a lot of, well, we're doing this, and this, but it didn't demonstrate enough impact. So we're now looking to say, well, what are we doing? And what's the impact it's having? And the next steps from that.
One of the things that Sharon's saying is, in the past, everything has been too descriptive. So what you try to do is put a value judgment into the writing that you do. Rather than describing all of the process, you say how good that process is, and then has it made a difference? This is still too long. It's still too descriptive.
Absolutely.
One of my comments.
Yeah, it is still too descriptive. It still needs to be analysed further. But we've actually managed to get this down to 55 pages so far, from one submission that was 49 pages long, from one service area. So we're condensing all the time so that we can get to more evaluative statements, and then the description actually comes into evidence instead, and it's not in the body of the report. Is that okay?
On the processes. Are there any significant issues within your self-evaluation against the new Westin framework?
I wouldn't say there are any issues. It's just going through everything and making sure that we've covered everything, and being evaluative with the relevant evidence in there, and making then sound judgments against the guidance within Westin. We, as a local authority, we have termly LALI visits, which are local authority link inspector visits with our Eston inspectors. And in the March visit, we did submit our self-evaluation report on the VIR as Eston required. And we've had a discussion surrounding that. And obviously, they've seen the very copy you've got, that it is raw, and therefore comments were picked up during that meeting.
Okay. Are there any other questions members wanted to ask on that? Can you tell us then, working with other partnerships and agencies, how do you capture the impact of working with the partners and agents?
What we did, or Jan agreed to do as well, back in the autumn term, we put on, once the self-evaluation report, the guidance had come out from Esting, we looked then at giving training opportunities to go through the new framework with various partners and agencies that obviously are included in the inspection and part of the education services. So we put on self-evaluation briefings, which was one of the appendices that were attached in the paper, which Jan led. And for those that couldn't attend those briefings, we put them on at numerous, we did it on a day basis, with different times, so for people to be able to attend. For those that couldn't attend, there was a health colleague that couldn't attend, then Jan has met with and gone through it in detail with her. For example, with the early years team, they came to the briefing, they had a go at using the briefing notes and the guidance then to look at their self-evaluation, and Jan's been working with them now to going back and forth with comments and amendments and getting them to use that evaluative language, because for some people they're not used to using that, and therefore it's supporting them then to coming to the right judgments. And what that enabled us to do then, especially in the early years team, is re-look at our team plans, because there's some things there in the team plans we're capturing. The self-evaluation, they weren't marrying up exactly. So now we're able now to line that back up and say, right, these are the actions, these are the next steps, so they should be captured in the team plan accordingly.
Can you tell us where you've been involved in schools in this process as well?
Presently, schools will have a copy. Once we've come to the end of the draft, we've been working with schools through various forums, through intervention panel boards, EIBs and things, and looking at school self-evaluations as well, and using the same process then for our own. Schools haven't seen this copy yet, because it's still, as I said, it hasn't been cleansed. So in the summer term, this will go out to the schools then for their comments as well.
Okay. Councillor Preston, sorry, Ambrose.
I just wanted to take a step back, if I could. Just this new inspection arrangement's coming in September, and I just want to know what support have you had from Eston, what collaborative work have you done just to inform and equip you for the changes?
As I say, we have our termly visits, and through those termly visits we have discussions then surrounding. It's not just about self-eval, but everything that we do in the education service. So Eston are fully aware then of what our priorities are, of schools causing concerns, various, all sorts of things that do feed into the self-evaluation. So we have those on a termly basis. Yeah.
Councillor Seabold.
Obviously, a self-evaluation report is a working document, and some of this is out of date already. How do you plan to update, evaluate, and produce an up-to-date working document?
If there is a timeline, this is just for the self-eval, but each service area has their own cyclical timeline, because depending on their business, they would have different points where you have data captures and so forth. And you're quite right, it could be relevant today, but come next week is totally out of date. So each area would have that in any case. And we've also got an overarching one, so that the aim is that by September we're currently up to date as much as we can be at that point.
So each department, when they're data changes or anything alters, they will feed into the self-evaluation.
And the whole point of it is that it's not just, well, here, we finished it now and it stays on the shelf. You're quite right. It is a working document, and as and when at any point then, it will be changed and amended accordingly.
Is there a planned date for evaluation and to revisit the SEL?
Yeah, we've got this time until September. There'll be one ongoing, and as I said, it'll be in connection to everybody's team plans and service areas as well. It'll also be included in that.
And then everybody comes back to the...
Yes, yeah, oh, absolutely. And there'll be one point of contact again. It'll be myself and Jan, so that we can control the... what we don't want is too many people at the same time, is keeping a master copy.
If I could, Chair. I'm looking at the outcomes now on page 30, which is 4, I think, in your document. 4 in your document, I think. Yeah. I mean, I can see perhaps 1 and 3. It's obvious where you've got the information from, but I've got questions about, children and young people in Torfaen having access to a wide range of good and quality opportunities, just to pick that 1 out of the remaining ones. What suite of data have you used to come up with that statement? And also two questions I'd like to ask about 2. One is, many children and young people progress well. Are you talking in Estin speak? That's 60%?
All of this is in line with the Estin speak.
So that's 60%?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember, but I can have a quick look.
Yeah, okay.
But it is in line with
And I was going to ask, nearly all eligible children, the last one, nearly all eligible children take up the childcare place. Is that 90%? Because I think that's Estin speak for 90%. Yeah. Okay. But basically, all the others then, effective partnership work in children and young people, the LA and its partners, what have you used? What information have you used to make those judgments?
After the briefings, then each department and each service area was asked then. We'd looked at the different areas within the self-evaluation. Jan had stripped it all out and said, right, this is the information we require in this area. So that's gone out to all the departments, and they've then self-evaluated, put their bits in. So for that, we'd have the play service, we'd have the youth service, we'd have the youth forum. There's a whole range of partners that's been reported on in here then, and from that we've summarised, looking at the data that they've submitted and the information and the work that they're doing.
Okay.
Any questions there? Dr. Sheridan, sorry.
Slightly rhetorical. Comparing this with the Port Talbot report, do you have any idea, or do you think what your views on the weighting that Estin will attach to level 2 plus inclusive outcomes in respect to their reports? Because it's in the second paragraph for the other Port Talbot report, so I assume it's quite an important. Have you got that? Is that because obviously that's an issue, isn't it, for this authority?
From my point of view, that's why the judgment against outcomes is adequate.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
Oops.
okay. Am I on now? From my point of view, that's why the outcomes is judged as adequate. Because if you've only got 50% of young people achieving the level 2 inclusive, you can't be good. You have to be, because 50% of those pupils aren't achieving. So, but then within that, there will be some good things happening as well. So, it doesn't just depend on one factor. You come to an overall judgment based on lots of different things within that. But the level 2 inclusive is an important one, definitely.
Yeah. On page 22, and this is this is of the report, the report you submitted, Jan. It says there, 3.4, the first thing, underperforming schools that are effectively identified and resourced and targeted appropriately on those with greatest need. The LA knows its schools well. But then, if you look at page 29 of the self-evaluation report, the first thing it says is 3 secondary schools saw an unexpected dip in performance in some key indicators at Key Stage 4. Is there not you're saying you know the school well, and then you're saying a bit later on that three schools out of 5 had an unexpected dip in performance?
Schools, as you're familiar, we have intervention meetings, we have EIBs for those schools where we monitor on a close basis. Where we do have feedback. We have our progress towards targets 3 times a year, and the June one then is the one that is the nearest one as we can to how exams, how the students, as they're performing. As you know, students can be unpredictable on the day, and with all, I don't have a crystal ball.
No.
We look at the progress towards targets, we work with schools throughout the year, and sometimes on the day of the exams, we know that in some schools, in one school in particular, it was either last year or 2 years, a group of boys sat in the exam and refused to write a word. Now, you can't predict that. They sat there, throughout the exam, but refused to write a single word. So the things, we can mitigate as much as we can, but we can't do everything. However, our processes then, as you said, unexpected dips. We do have processes in place, the summit meetings in September where we have issued pre-warning notices to schools then. We do have a process for those for those dips that possibly weren't reported in the June progress towards targets. So it's trying to say that we don't have total control over how students sit their exams. We can prepare them as much as we can, and schools, and work with schools to enable them to do that. How they perform on the day is another matter. There have been changes last year, as you're fully aware, in the English and Maths. We try to do as much as we can to support our schools in going through those changes. And again, then, we do have those systems in place then when things don't quite go according to plan. There is a robust system now to enable that support to be given to those schools as soon as possible.
I'll come back to you on that, because I think, I'm not arguing about the interventions after the fact. I'm not really arguing about the fact that you can't have a perfect understanding of every school. I'm just saying that you said that the local authority knows its schools well on page 22, and then on page 23, on page 55, you said there is an unexpected dip. And it does, if I was an history inspector, I would look at that, I would pick that up, and I would say, well, do you really know your schools that well? Is that the terminology you should be using, or should you say, we know the local authority knows its schools fairly well, very well, rather than just well?
I think, we've been on a big journey. I think it's fair to say we do know our schools very well. We're not there 100% of the times. We have the intervention board meetings, we have the EIB meetings, we have schools on watching briefs, even if they're not amber or red. We have the schools causing concern protocol, and I think we have built a relationship with our schools so that if there is any concerns and issues, they do let us know in a timely manner. There are some things that are out of our control.
I think in terms of the writing within here, you're quite right to point that out, and that is why this is a work in progress, because we will be drilling down into each of these things after this meeting. To say, is that good? Is it not good? The copy that Sharon's got, which you haven't got, has got some of my questions in there as well about, well, this is what you're saying, I'm not sure whether that's good or not. So there are things that we need to drill down. So those sorts of comments are really, really helpful in terms of refining this document. So we end up with one that is fit for purpose, but it is a proper work in progress. I take your point definitely on.
Yeah, I was just looking at the point about governor training, where it says it's good quality and is well attended by Torfaen governors. How do you determine that? Just from anecdotal evidence from governors' meetings myself and knowing other governors, I know a lot of people struggle to attend some of the sessions, and you can access some of them online now using the hub system. But I just wondered how that was measured.
We get termly BIS reports from EAS. The BIS reports are business from the business element, and that then has schools, courses, governor courses. It includes all the provision that they provide and the courses they provide, and they also feed back to us then on the attendance and so forth, on not just governors but for schools, any network groups, maths courses and so forth. They feed back to us.
Sorry, can I just come back? So when you get that feedback, if there are governors that aren't attending training, is that followed through? Yes. Is that followed up?
Yes, and that should be followed up. One through my LA QA meeting, because that's where these are picked up. So I'd have that conversation with Julian, who's our PCA, but also through governor support as well. So because they should go back to the governing bodies and to the chairs of governors to see who's done their mandatory training, who hasn't, and who's where they're at. And we have asked them as an LA to keep us informed so that we can also support chairs of governors in that respect.
Just a further point on that, and again, is just listening to colleagues when you're at governor meetings and speaking to people. I know that for Torfaen we do feel that there is a lack of local training, so a lot of the training is further afield, so I don't know if that's something that could be...
Yeah, we can have a look at that back at LA and see what we can offer.
Let me just ask about that. The attendance of governors at some governing body meetings, is that relayed back to the executive member who makes these governors' appointments, so that he is aware that governors have been appointed and they're not attending the meeting? Because it is something that was raised with us.
Yeah. They will be if there's a concern. For example, I know at one primary school recently, an LA governor has stepped down due to lack of attendance and so forth, and that was through, and I understand that the exec member had a conversation there. So it is reported back through us.
Yeah, comment in the report that says, overall, the local authority provide timely and appropriate provision for pupils with ALN. And I do take on board the fact you said overall, but we do get, via the Schools Monitoring Subcommittee, we do get issues around, not around getting the help, but the waiting times necessary to bring in CAMs, to bring in school psychologists, to get appointments and entrance to the PRU, which is in a lot of cases full. So, do we need to review that statement, or are we happy that it's accurate?
I think where we can control it, absolutely we're reviewing to look at how best we can get that support to children ASAP. Some things are out of our control, such as CAMs and things, but that doesn't mean we're not working with them and relaying not our concerns, but in discussions with them to see how we can better that process.
Sorry, on the ALN as well, obviously there is going to be the implementation of the new ALN bill. I just wondered how schools are going to manage that, given, and we looked at it at scrutiny, where a number of schools have had quite substantial reductions in the amount of ALN funding that they're receiving.
Yeah. We're working with schools through the Elenco group. There's been they're fully aware of what's going on, and we're updating them on a regular basis. There will be training coming out, further information coming out, and training from the ALN team as well, and the ALN team's working with schools as well. I appreciate with the funding, but I think schools now we're looking at moderating how that funding is allocated in respects to the amount of schools, School Action Plus and things, because I think some schools hadn't reported that accurately, and they've recognised that they've not lost out on funding, but because of the inaccuracies in the reporting, it has had an implication on their funding as well. So we are working with schools on that.
Siobhan? Sorry.
There's a lot of statements in the SER. I just wondered how you achieved the evidence, because obviously evidence, Estyn will be saying, so what?
Oh,
Where's the
absolutely.
evidence? So how do you accumulate the evidence, and where could we find that?
Yeah. You're quite right. There's no evidence attached to this, because this is the first draft. We wanted to get everybody working in having a go at working in the evaluative language, and we have, by doing that, we have said, don't put anything in there. If you can't evidence it, then don't put it in. So the next tranche now is looking at the evidence and cross-referencing that to go with it. And as Jan said at the beginning, it's being succinct with the evidence and clear, and not putting... we had, as Jan mentioned, from one service area, we had 49 pages just on their self-evaluation alone, with a lot of evidence as well. So we've had to unpick that and think, that's great, however, not relevant at this point. It's unpicking it, and it's going back then to look at what is relevant, but it comes back to what's in their team plans and looking at funding as well. It's aligning it all together, because this shouldn't be separate to what we're doing. Once we, at the by the autumn term, once we've cleansed it and updated it, there will be evidence embedded into it as well. So the relevant evidence should be within the document. It's not in there yet, we take that, but it will be in the final article, in the final document. And it'll be updated accordingly then, as and when new evidence is updated.
I just wanted to talk about the safeguarding arrangements. You say that they're robust. How do you know they're robust? How are they tested? How are they checked?
Right. We, through the safeguarding team, there's training, there's an audit. All schools have just conducted their section, I think it's section 175, where our teams then have gone back out, the safeguarding team have gone back out to support schools with that. We work very well with our schools. As I said, we've built that relationship up. Where there are concerns, they've been dealt with in a timely fashion, and we've got the evidence. I don't want to go into detail in that, but we've got the evidence for that as well.
I wanted to ask, the CYPIB, can you tell me, has that been meeting recently? Because I know that it was a partnership that the Recovery Board requested that we set up. But to my knowledge, and as Chair of Scrutiny, I was invited to those meetings, I don't think it's met for a little while. There's a lot of references to it in the report, and I wondered, is that relevant now? It hasn't met for...
It will be relevant. It's in the process of being, what's the word I'm looking for? Reconstituted, absolutely, thank you. And in alignment with the PSB priorities as well. They're in the process of, it's all aligning in there. There will be new arrangements for the CYPIB, but I'm not privy to exactly what those new arrangements are. But once they'll be up and running, I believe from the autumn term, then absolutely this will be part of it. Will be scrutinised under the new arrangements.
It's just validating. You've made the statements. How do we know that that is correct? How do you validate that leadership and management is good?
Again, it comes back to looking at performance management of the different services within. We have quartile performance management meetings with the Chief Education Officer. He goes through each department and looks at their fund-on data, and all the relevant people within that team attend those meetings. They've been up and running now for a few years, so there's a robust system in place. It's then looking at the service plans, it's looking at work smart, it's that alignment going through, and obviously into the corporate plan tree.
Basically, bullet point 2 says continue to improve target setting. What work's being done? Sorry, wrong one. My apologies. Bullet point 1: embed strategies that improve literacy skills. Have we identified what literacy strategies are most effective?
This is working closely with the AES and looking at school-to-school improving systems. What we're looking at now, we know that there are schools there who are performing year on year and doing extremely well on their literacy skills. So it's looking at not just in Torfaen, but using schools across the region then at more school-to-school work, because we know that works. And it's looking then to drive that and developing that, and that's working with the AES. Their model now is more school-to-school work rather than sending teachers on literacy courses, because the impact from school to school, actually going to see how does that work, what can you bring back to your own school, because it's a two-way sharing process rather than just I'll go, you tell me what to do and I'll come back and do it.
Just a statement. It's quite difficult. You can read the report, but without having the evidence to back it up, it's very difficult to actually evaluate a report if you can't see the evidence.
Yeah. Would it be, because obviously we welcome your comments and that's part of the self-evaluation process, would it be worthwhile at the end of the summer term, once we've done that quality assurance, that by then we'll have had that evidence in and that we send that out to members? And welcome further comments before we finalise. But we're aiming for a finalised version in September, because obviously the new framework starts in September, so it would be worthwhile then, with the evidence embedded in, that possibly you could further comment on it.
The Council's Overview and Scrutiny Committee function is working well to support improvement. I think we would like to add that maybe we would like to be involved in more policy development, and the executive members' forward work plan, which at the moment we don't have access to. Okay. So I think, we would like to make that comment. And also you have in there the Schools Monitoring Committee is just looking at green schools. We have actually looked at the red schools, and we've only looked at one green school, and we are not. Yeah, but we are now back on. That was just one that we were looking at to get an idea. So that's just a couple of comments that we were in the report that we think we'd like to make comments about.
We particularly picked on that green school because of the issues around transition, because they were moving another school in at the same time.
It's all relevant.
Are there any other comments that you wish to make? There is one item actually in the appendix about the number of home educated pupils has increased by 63. And we'd just like some more information on that. Can you tell us, has some work been carried out to find why the numbers are increasing? And
Just, I know in the ALN team they've just done a report on that, so I wouldn't like to give the details of that because it has come to management team, but I can share that report with you, and that should have everything in there on the home education.
Could I have a second, Rita? If you don't mind, can I? It's increased by 63. There's no total figure in here. I think it might be useful for there to be a total figure in there. But yeah, I mean, it was one of the first things I picked up on reading this report. It is really frightening to think that 63 pupils in a authority this small has pulled that in within 1 year.
It is parental choice mainly. Yeah, absolutely. But as I said, that we have in the Education Service recently conducted a report on this because this was a concern for us, and I know in our Lally visit that was an agenda item there as well, so we can share that report with you.
Of course.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, is it in a particular area that...
I don't think so.
It's right across the board.
Yeah. But
Can I add something to that then? Because what concerns me about this is once that child is pulled out of the school is no longer responsible for that child. But obviously there are immediate safeguarding issues around that. So for there to be these high numbers, it would be interesting. I hope in that report there is something about how we're ensuring safeguarding for those pupils, because it is difficult to go walking into somebody's house and say,
and we can't.
No.
And that's the difficulty. Absolutely, we recognise all your concerns. We have those concerns ourselves. Because we can't go walking in unless the parent invites us in. We can't enter into that home. Unless a safeguarding, it's slightly different, but we can't just knock on the door and ask to come in.
Yeah, but how do you find out about safeguarding? Sorry, how do you find out about safeguarding issues if you've never seen a child?
We don't unless there's an issue.
could paragraph about fixed term exclusions. I mean, I've read that paragraph a few times. It does seem very unclear. Could we look at that and see how we can make it a little bit easier to read? Yeah, the bottom of the page there, the total number of fixed term exclusions. Is it page 19 on your...
19. Sorry.
45, the bottom?
19.
19, yeah. It does seem to be a rising trend, and what are we doing to address this concern? But that paragraph does seem very...
We are working with schools on the fixed term penalties. We are looking at supporting schools where there are concerns and putting more support in with them, and we know that in some schools there's been a turnaround where they've had support, they've looked at their internal processes, they've had support as well, and there's been a turnaround then. So we're looking at those processes to see how we can enable other schools then to learn from them. But it is, again, looking at that level of support to work with the schools.
Okay, any other questions on that?
Basically on page 46, the disparity between individual schools, the school inclusion rates remain problematic. And then it goes on to say, whereas the highest excluding school is Cumbrae High School, with 177 exclusions. We did Crossy Caerleog School at the last monitoring committee, and you seem to be working out the figures in here different from that, because what we've got is the number of days lost, and what you're saying, what you're giving out here, is that because Estin want these numbers, not these numbers?
There's confusion on this as well. That data is now out of date because Cumbrae High isn't one of our worst excluding schools, far from it now. But it will be schools have asked for clarity around that as well, because on one element we're reporting on one thing and on another. So we are working on that to make sure that it's just one. When we're reporting on it, everybody's got a clear understanding of what it is we're reporting on. So we'll take that comment back as well. But in regards to Cwmbran High, again, when this was written, it's now out of date. Yeah, we've seen a massive turnaround on there. And the biggest way they've done that is they've conducted termly baby showers in the evenings. They've recognised they've done it in the evening because of working parents, and they've had a huge, I have to say, it was a big effort from all concerned in the early years team and the health team as well. A proper collaboration. There were many raffle prizes. It was well organised and it was well publicised, and they had a really good turnout. I can't remember the figures, but they had a really good turnout, and from that I think 18 signed up, and I can't remember how many actually turned up, but it's turned that figure on its head. It used to be poor, and hence now we're doing it on a termly basis, and that seems to be working. They are taking up the antenatal training, and the feedback from those people attending is that due to the times, the changes in times, it's meant more people can access it as well. So people are being very flexible within their working patterns to accommodate to be able to do the training as well. But it's also looking at feedback that we've had from our clients and taking that into consideration.
Can I ask, page 38, page 12 of your document, could you explain that first paragraph right at the top? Because it doesn't make any sense to me at all. No, gender differences have increased for all indicators. Page 12.
Oh, right. In other words, the gap in the gender difference.
No, I didn't mean that. If you read it, it says increases and decreases, and then it says all subjects except maths, and then it says all subjects except English.
Instead of listing all the subjects, yeah, okay, we can make that. We try to summarise it instead of saying it was in maths.
I'm not convinced it makes any sense whether it's summarised or not, to be honest.
Yeah, maybe we'll reword it and make sure the subjects, where we're seeing the decreases that is listed.
Yeah, because it says gender differences have increased in the first sentence, and then when gender differences have decreased in the last sentence. So it's one of those that you need to go back and relook at completely, I think.
It's one of those that is descriptive and not evaluative. Yeah. Because what we don't know is whether that's good or not from that statement. So it is then about asking those questions.
Well, I'm not sure the statement makes any sense, actually, but there we go.
No, but that's...
Yeah, okay.
Are there any questions you want to ask me? Do you want to look at quality of education services?
There is one I'd like to say. I mean, it says in here, the schools causing concern policy has been rewritten. And then we're asking what changes have been made. I mean, to be honest, a little disappointing we've got to ask what changes, because as the learning communities, we should know, but we, as Colette said earlier, we don't get these policy documents.
Policies, and therefore the consortia adjust their policies in line. Would it be helpful that every time we get those updates, that I send them out with highlighting the changes? Yeah. Any questions there?
actually, the rollout of the reading scheme is complete and remains an area for development across the LA. What areas of development and what are we doing about that, please?
Torfaen Reading Scheme initially started with 12 schools, 3 Wave 1 schools and 9 Wave 2 schools. We've continued that, not with all of them, because obviously there was a funding element, but we've prioritised that and then continued that with some of the other schools. And some schools have taken it up themselves because they saw value in it. They've kept it going in that respect.
If I could just come in as a representative, that's one of the reasons why I asked my question earlier about embedding strategy to improve literacy skills. I was aware that Alfie had been withdrawn, and I'm just wondering really what we put in place to replace it, and are we happy that we do have a replacement and that literacy is improving?
Yeah, Alfie was to do with maths.
Yeah,
Exactly. But EAS are working with that, and I believe there's a data breach around the Alfie software that the company was refusing to address, and therefore that's why it had to be pulled, because people could access data on other pupils which necessarily weren't in their school. So it was a data breach in that respect. So EAS have been working with our schools then in moving forward, but that's why the Alfie software came to an end.
Have we put something in place to replace it? And also the same, I suppose, with the Torfaen Reading Scheme and the literacy issues. I mean, what areas are we looking for development in both maths and English?
Absolutely. It's coming back to the numeracy skills and literacy skills, because that's what we're finding time and time again, that it's not embedded in some schools where it should be. That's why when we're looking at schools then, and the challenge advisors going in, looking at support plans, that there's a very clear bespoke package that addresses these issues within the schools. And that is not one that's been just pulled off a shelf and that will fit everybody. It's looking at what exactly are the needs of the schools, and the bespoke plans then in both literacy and maths with the EAS expertise are working very closely with our schools then to address those concerns and issues. And again, that's where the school-to-school work is coming in then, where there are schools that are doing really well across the region and not just in Torfaen. Schools are either encouraged or possibly more encouraged then, depending on where they are in their support needs, to work with the schools where they're successfully doing this.
Just wondered how you would monitor that literacy and numeracy are embedded within the schools. Because we've done a couple of questionnaires, and if you ask the student what literacy you do in geography or what numeracy you do in history, they'll say none.
Yeah.
Now, how do you educate the students that they actually, in geography, they're doing graphs or what have you, and that is part of numeracy? How do you get that embedded within the school?
I think that comes down to the quality of the teaching and learning and being explicit when you're doing that, although it's a geography lesson, that there are elements of their literacy coming through, and it's that expectation, isn't it? So from a primary perspective, students will know this is exactly as you said, this is a literacy, because I'm going, it's literacy hour or it's numeracy or so forth, but it's having that expectation then that the skills you learn during that are applied in every lesson you do, and not just that, well, in literacy I'll write a really good piece of writing because it's expected of me, but in science or in history, when I come to doing a piece of writing there, I'm not going to apply anything I've learned there, but it's having that expectation. But that comes down to the quality of the teaching and learning then, and having that as a non-negotiable through the school, isn't it? It's that school working, everybody being accountable and having ownership of that to say, no, this is how we're going to drive those results up. And the expectation is that even though you may be a geography expert or you're teaching geography, that those literacy skills are embedded and they're taught. And the expectation is there.
Sorry, 2.2, support for vulnerable learners.
Yeah. No. I was just going to ask about the Beyond the Behaviour policy. Really good to see this being well received by schools, and 100% of head teachers saying that they believed it would benefit the schools. So that's really positive. It says on here that a evaluation by the EPS was to be completed by spring. Has that been done?
It's in the process of being done, and then we'll update the SARE then accordingly. But it's done on an annual basis. Yeah.
Just come back on that if I can, just to say that from the school subcommittee and other bits and pieces that we've heard, we know that behaviour in schools is becoming quite a bit of an issue at times, and just wonder whether there should be more focus in the report on.
Where at some schools they manage the behaviour extremely well, and at other schools then that's where we're seeing a rise in exclusions and so forth. So we have seen a significant drop in 2 of our secondary schools where behaviour in the past and exclusions has been a concern, and they've completely turned that round through support and working closely with the schools, and the schools really looking at their own internal systems as well. And again, it comes back to the accountability and ownership of that within those schools. We are also looking at our behaviour support, going in to support those schools where concerns are worrying, where we're seeing elements of the behaviour possibly not where it should be, and where exclusions as well are rising. But also, we are also looking at our 2 schools where we've seen a significant drop to lead as well, asking schools to go and visit them to see how they've been successful and to see what problems they faced and how they overcame those problems in their behaviour.
You know that because I mean, I don't know if you know, but we contacted Aled Evans, who's the Director of Education at Neathport Talbot, and he sent us some helpful advice, really. But listening to what you just said there, right, you're talking about the schools a lot, and one of the things that he put in his replies to us was place more weight on the progress of individuals, and just basically saying that, basically what I'm saying to you is, it seems to me that you're looking at a school and saying, oh, this school's improved, this school, and whereas perhaps we should be focusing more on individuals to find where the problems are, rather than just looking at the overall stats. You know, our exclusions have gone down, that's great, but you know, if you've still got 1 pupil within your school that's...
Absolutely. And that comes back to how we capture, what data we capture and what we're reporting on, because sometimes that can be masked in the data, and as you said, if it's 1 child but they're excluding time and time again, it's a very different picture to 20 children being excluded as a one-off. You know, there are different things, so it's coming back and looking more deeply at our data then, and drilling down to see actually, okay, here's what it's telling us at the top level, but if we drill down, what is it actually telling us? And that's why we're working with our schools then to unpick it further to see, well, is there a behaviour problem, or is it just a very small, is it throughout the school, or is it a small cohort, or down to 1 and 2 individuals then, and putting in the relevant support.
Sorry, I was just wondering whether you collated the evidence that it might be an LA decision that has caused bad behaviour, like the amalgamation of 2 schools, a red school and a green school, and then not wanting that, and then evaluating from the start of the process how that behaviour is improved, and not the knowledge that it was the decision of the LA and councillors that actually may have caused that issue in the first place. I don't know whether that type of evaluation goes on, whether or not you've got an amalgamation of primary schools that didn't want that to happen, and therefore you see a disruption in the behaviour of children joining 2 schools that didn't want to be there in the first place.
I accept that, but we also worked very hard with those 2 schools that were amalgamating to put transition plans in place, which took place over a year before the school closed.
What I'm saying is, you might have data now saying that behaviour is pretty good in individual schools, but once they amalgamate, then behaviour could go up in the air. And do you take that into account, that that is a new school being put into place, and that, you know, that could be one of the influences in the
It would be looking at all factors and not just honing in on the one. It would be looking at a whole range of reasons, and yes. And as I said, it'll be about that drilling down to see what are those causes.
Just amalgamations, really, because like we've got the issue at Crossing Carlisle School. We've now got 18 appeals because we've reduced the standard number for the intake this year. How happy are those 18 pupils going to be if they don't get into the school?
That's why we're working with schools and with families then to see what we can do in regards to that.
But the annual monitoring of the school's capacity then, you know, how rigorous are we with that? Because as part of our sort of visits to schools, the last 2 schools, I think we've had 3 schools actually, we've had this about the capacity in schools. How do we plan for that, and are we planning appropriately?
That's down to the 21st century schools, and we're well within, you know, we've hit all our band A successfully in reducing where we needed to reduce with school closures, where surplus places and things. So, you know, it is monitored robustly and actioned. Now we're looking at band B, that will soon come into place, and some of that is should take into account.
Just on that, really, in the sense that, as you're aware, because you sit in these meetings with us, I mean, Green Meadow were criticised by Estin because they had 37 pupils in one class. We know Llantarnam is expecting an inspection any moment. We know they have 35. And I understand some of the issues in Llantarnam is not the local authority's fault, it's Welsh Government's, because they said the school's got to be this size, and they're still building on the site. You know, they're building houses next door to the school, basically, and these houses are the sort of age group moving in that are going to have primary age children. But are we, you know, are we doing everything we can?
I think so. And, you know, when we do look across Torfaen, we do have enough spaces.
Who said anything about parental choice?
Absolutely, I totally agree, but there are some things out of our control as an LA, and especially when you think of Llantarnam, I think the original bid was for it to be bigger. It was refused because of the case wasn't there when they looked at Band B and surplus places and everything, that there was enough. And you know, as well as a new school, it changes parents from far and wide then. It draws in a different catchment, as it's not just catchment then, people are prepared to travel and so forth, but we'll weather that out. But on paper, we do have enough spaces for our students, and I get the parental choice. I do get that.
You say they have the parental choice. Children in Victoria School, they're changing to Ganteg or Comfredor. They were given the 2 options. But the people who took Comfredor, now the people who took the Comfredor school as a choice, because they live like 3 miles away, they're told they've got to get their kids to school and not be bused.
That'll be down to the council's transport policy and not down to us. Yeah, and I think that was changed recently or within the last few years.
I think it's communications as well. How well are we communicating those issues then to the parents?
But I know for every step of the way with Victoria, a closure of a school is never an easy thing. It's painful, but I think they were communicated, and I get that it wasn't as straightforward as possibly. It was a painful journey for some parents. And it still is.
Just concerned what Chris was just saying now, because obviously we had the situation a few years ago, or more than a few years now, where Trevething was closed, and basically the Westmont and Aberystwyth were then upgraded to take those pupils on board. And now, all these years down the road, we've now got a situation where there's no defined boundaries in Trevethyn for either one of those schools. And I wonder if there's any learnings out of that, because the situation there's still very confused, because it's technically in Westmoreland's catchment that both schools were upgraded.
Sorry, Mr. Mills, just to interrupt there. I think you've gone slightly off topic on that about today's issue, but that's something perhaps we could look at in another.
But they're just taking it in the green places and where they are in public policy.
Mr. Preston, sorry.
I just wanted to go down is page 40 on your document about the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Act rollout of training. I know this is a working document, but it says that you're on track to meet the March 2018 deadline for Group 1. Is that being complete?
Yeah.
That is complete. And the rollout then has commenced in January 2018 for Group 2.
Yeah.
When is that due to be complete?
Oh, I don't know, but I can find out for you.
Yeah?
Yeah, thanks.
Use of resources, if I could, Chair. Schools with deficits, this is your page 52, our page 78. Schools with deficits are required to seek approval from the Section 151 officer for any managed deficit. How are we, I understand and agree with the statement, but are we in line with other authorities? Because we're getting feedback from some schools that other authorities are not taking such a strict view of managed deficits. You know, i.e., they're allowing those schools to run them over for much longer periods of time than this authority.
I can't comment on any other authorities, but I can find that out for you.
Yeah,
but where we have licence deficits, we find that schools within the agreed time come back into surplus, and it works for us. It's about supporting those schools to get back on track.
I understand that, but obviously some schools are going to feel a bit
Yeah.
aggrieved when they hear of other schools that have been running managed deficits for like 7 or 8 years, and those deficits have actually increased. They've not had to get rid of teachers.
No,
and that puts us in a I don't know, an unfair position with other authorities.
Well, it depends. It's better to have a surplus, come back into surplus in 2 to 3 years, rather than keep running a deficit for 7 to 8 years. Because then you've got a sound knowledge of your budget, rather than nobody wants to stay in deficit. You can't, and if it's it's more of a short-term, not solution, a short-term concern rather than a long-term, and certainly not to add to that deficit then. It's about managing the budget, getting the right support in, and turning that budget round to a surplus position, which is where in Torfaen I think we're very good at doing, by supporting our schools.
Yeah. Just say we are very good at keeping within budget and retaining our target on, but we are measured against other schools within Wales that have, such as Cardiff, where they just keep piling the pounds into the schools, keeping them in the deficit budget, but we are being measured on that. So we're doing the job properly, but we are measured against other authorities that are not.
And it's about having those conversations then with Welsh Government and other bodies where they, we can control what we can control, and I think we do that really well.
I know you've got a bit in there, but elected members, being corporate parents, have a duty to ask the necessary question on their looked after children, and that information doesn't come without asking for it very easily. Okay. And I just wondered what we were going to do about that. I'm looking in the report, and there is a great deal of information what you're doing about You've got specific groups in there, but you know there's a particular specific group that elected members have to monitor and give that, and you have to give Welsh Government information on. We don't seem to have that information.
With the exec member and see whether he can share that when it's available.
I mean, that was a point that I picked up with the report. It frequently says all members, and to be honest, my view is that unless you're on the learning communities, most members don't have much knowledge. I mean, when I was on Gwent County Council, education was a standing committee, so every single member, as was social services, every single member was involved. But I do feel sometimes when I talk to members, they don't have a huge grip on education, particularly if they don't, especially if they don't sit on this, or they're not teachers or have some involvement in schools. Governors sometimes, but not all governors have the sort of intense training that we have here. So I do think perhaps all members might need to be slightly reworded.
Or defined within the committee.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
To make a comment, actually, there's quite a few references in the report to Communities First, supporting pupils to improve their attendance, supporting pupils with mental health issues. Well, Communities First really has been reduced dramatically now, and I just wondered...
And again, that comes down to timing. When this was pulled together, they were still active. They were in that transition period.
Okay.
Under conclusions then, I look at it when it says the local authority has an ambition to be ranked 13 performing local authority by 2019. Given that that's 1 year away and we have 3 of our 5 secondary schools in red, 1 in amber, and, you know, it's a big ask. Yeah.
It's a big ask, but it's not without risks. But I think, it is, we are on an improving journey, and I think we need to demonstrate that as well. And if we don't have high aspirations and high expectations, then it's trying to capture that without it being too far in the sky. But when you look at where we should be in regards to Wales and the free school meals ranking, we should be around the 13th, 14th mark. So, we'd like to be above that. First, we need to get to that, and we acknowledge that. We were 15th last year, so not a million miles off. And again, it's about improving that and getting, if we can tip it over to the other side.
I suppose I was looking at it really where we're saying that,
this is I should
leadership and management is judged as adequate and needs improvement. Does that not indicate that we might struggle with this?
I think the fact that we've recognised that where our needs for improvement are, then we can address those. And it is about pace. There'll be some things we can address. There'll be quick wins and there'll be things that'll take longer. But I don't think as an education service that there's anything that we don't know of. And that we do have concerns. We are working on those with our partners, with our agencies, and that's why we've got our areas of development. They'll be addressed then through team plans, through the service plans, and they're monitored on a regular basis. And so, it is about having high expectations, but it's also about the pace of movement as well, and the recognition that there'll be some things that will take longer, but those that we will endeavour to improve on a quicker, with that pace.
Theme 3, the conclusions. Sorry.
Just a couple of quick ones. I know this, you said it's a working document. How regularly is it reviewed and changed? Is it just as and when it needs to be?
As and when, as I said, that there is a cyclical, each team plan has a cyclical timeline. for when they're collecting their data, because as you can appreciate, we have for schools there's a school year, but then for early years there's a completely different pattern to that. For youth and play there's a completely different data set. They don't all marry up. So yeah, absolutely, because we need it to be relevant and we need it. Yeah, absolutely.
Are there any other areas of the self-evaluation plan that need further development? So?
Apart from going through it all, cleansing it, updating it and making it relevant. Absolutely. It is about that constant reviewing, cross-referencing, looking at the evidence, looking to see, well, asking that so what question through everything that we do. And for some departments, it's a massive learning curve, but, you know, we're well on that journey now.
The last question on here, so it might not be the last of everybody else. When is the local authority inspection by Estin expected?
The framework comes into place in September, so any time from there on. Because it's been piloted this year with 2 other local authorities. As of September, it will be in place, so as of then onwards.
Bryn Teg Nursery shut in now. We had the best estimate report in Wales. Where of all these children, the new nursery now is going to be in Crymford. Will we have the same best estimate report there?
Hopefully we will work with them to support them and yeah, hopefully.
Also, you just mentioned the pilot projects. Have we learned from any of the pilot areas? Have we looked at what their best practice is and what is expected of us on our new SEM?
We obviously their reports are out, but we're also looking. If you look at the timeline here, we're looking at to have a quality assurance test of our self-evaluation, and we are inviting possibly senior colleagues from either or both local authorities to test that through with us, because they've been through the process. I'm working with them. I believe Aled from Neath Port Talbot is meeting with Derma to go through the processes with him. So yeah, absolutely, it's making sure that absolutely.
We thank Sharon and Jan for coming along this afternoon and taking part in our scrutiny. Thanks very much.
Absolutely. No, but that's the whole part of self-evaluation.
Okay. If we move on then to item 6, where we look at the conclusions, scrutiny activity, and we've been asked to scrutinise the self-evaluation report and determine whether the systems and process for developing the report are robust and fit for purpose.
Well, the draft isn't.
I learned nothing. Chair, sorry. I learned very little. If you look at leadership and management, it's just 15 glib management speak. I just learned there's nothing there. There's absolutely nothing there. Everything's well established. Use overuse of certain words like robust, which they love. It just doesn't mean it. It's just vague. It's a vague template which they've sort of just typed in. It doesn't. Absolutely nothing from that.
Yeah, I mean, my initial answer is no. And I mean, when you look at the question, it says, is Tolvine's self-evaluation process robust and fit for purpose in producing an accurate self-evaluation? Well, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But this isn't a robust and fit for purpose document because A, it gives us more questions than it does answers. 2, it's out of date. And 3, it hasn't even been cleansed. So, to be honest, my feeling is it's come to us too early.
I was going to say, can I just sort of distinguish there between the first 2 points of the scrutiny activity? So the first bit is you've got to determine whether the systems and processes in developing it are robust. And then the second part is testing whether the self-evaluation report is accurate. So the second part, you're clearly saying that the self-evaluation report is not an accurate reflection. But in terms of the process of developing it, do you still think that's not robust either?
I've got concerns about whether it's robust because this should be a working document, and it should have been up to date before it came to us. I wonder why they still work. I mean, the things about exclusions, they were last year's figures, not this year's figures, and this year's figures have been out now for quite some time. A year or 6 to 9 months. And so as a consequence, I do wonder whether or not, what are they going to do to get this fit for purpose by September? Obviously burn the midnight oil and stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning. So, I don't feel happy to say that the self-evaluation process is robust because I don't know.
Can I say that I think it's a good thing that we've had it now, because how otherwise would we have scrutinised it other than seeing it in this state and seeing what the outcome of it all should be? But hopefully we'll see a good self-evaluation supported by evidence, so that we can see that that is actually evidence to the outcomes.
Dr. Sheridan,
Yeah, also, they use a phrase in schools called teaching to the test, and it just seems to me it's written as though, well, it's going to get us through. It's just the way it looks to me. Adequate, good, adequate. Well, that sort of puts you in the ballpark there, doesn't it? You're okay. You're not just giving yourself 3 goods. You're not giving yourself 3 adequates. But the fact there's no evidence, of course, and I understand that that at a developmental stage, it is very difficult to make these overall judgments. Well, really, isn't it? So I'm not even sure how valid or just coming up with those early definitions are really. I'm just. The problem is the leadership and management, because I didn't get anything from that at all. I don't know how they're assessing how their leaders and managers are effective. There's no evidence at all, is there? How do we know?
Still a lot of consultation work to be done, isn't there?
And the other thing
with
that, of course, is that we spend a lot of time in this committee talking about levels of literacy in school as well. Levels of literacy in writing reports is an issue, isn't it? Frankly, as well, isn't it?
But following on from that point, do you have any specific recommendations in terms of improving the way that self-evaluation report is written?
Definitely needs cleansing, doesn't it? There is no doubt it needs cleansing because the same things are said. It's too long.
Duplicated.
It's too long. There's too much duplication. There's no evidence backing any of the judgments that are or insufficient evidence. It's like I say, scrutiny activities to determine whether the systems and processes for developing the report are robust and fit for purpose. Well, having read that report, I don't know. That. But mainly the reason I don't know is whether the self-evaluation report is an accurate reflection of Tolvine LEA. Well, this report isn't. So it gives us, so with having read this report, knowing that it's out of date, it hasn't been cleansed and it hasn't got the background information, how can we determine whether the LEA has got systems and processes in place to do it? Yeah, it is.
They should have had I mean, the self-evaluation is a working document. There should be one that they're working to now, and any differences in that should have been highlighted rather than just producing what they think is a new self-evaluation according to Estin framework. But, there we are.
Chair, they say they're going to, obviously, they say they're going to obviously trim it down, make it more concise, but obviously without the evidence, you've got all that to add in yet, haven't you? So it's either going to have a very large appendix, or it's going to be difficult to actually do that.
To be scrutinised by the learning committee's summer term, and then summer term draft SER to amend it, follow the comments, so they're going to amend it following our comments, and then they're hoping to have it completed July, draft SER amended, updated and completed by summer term, July, August, and then the final SER presented to the CYPIB in readiness for an inspection. So I'm guessing by then that the CPYIB will be up and running and
That's
ready for
issue really in this timeline thing. The CYPIB has virtually been disbanded. They're going to put it back together again in order to agree this in autumn. I mean, it's May now, and there's August in the middle of all this, and we don't meet for, well, as an authority, we don't meet all through August, the end of July and the beginning of September. So,
well, I think we need to express our Tuesday to robust concerns about the whole way it's been done.
Whether there's robust systems developed in the report, and I mean, we can say definitely it's not an accurate reflection of how the LEA, because there's too much out-of-date information in there. So I think once the executive member gets that, I think perhaps that would be sufficient for him. I mean, how can you say you've got to improve this when it's barely fit for purpose as it is?
The work to be done to it really to come back in any sort of form, isn't there? So we'd be looking at the time frames as well on that.
Sorry, Chair, I have just got a couple of more action points rather than recommendations, if you just want me to quickly go through those.
Yeah, thank you.
With reference to the CYPIB being reconstituted, whether you wanted to put something to the exec member that the chair of scrutiny, of the learning scrutiny, still be a membership on that to be able to feed back any important items back to the scrutiny committee.
I think in the future that is definite.
But I think we also need to put, that needs to be put back in place.
I mean, the Children and Young People's Improvement Board should be in place because that's what we're trying to do. I can't see why they've disbanded it or not used it for this process, let alone any other process. Yeah, it is. There's a lot of references in the document and we're saying it's not functional.
Yeah, some action points then. You would like Sharon to share the report back from the committee meeting that looked at homeschooling. There was a couple of sections that you wanted rewording, but it's clear that overall I think you want all of it. Any policy updates from Welsh Government in certain policies that you were querying that had been updated and that you knew nothing of, so Sharon mentioned that she would send updates round in future. She would find out the information with regards to local authorities' use of reserves, and also Councillor Seaborn that looked after children, information from the exec member.
You want evidence?
On that evidence, yeah.
think as well, I mean, this is part of, I think, the knowledge process. They've said in here, all councillors, this. Well, it's blatantly not true. And I don't mean that I'm not trying to be unfair to them. But we know quite a lot.
That was the last
But if
action.
you're on Greener or you don't know much. So, my suggestion, my recommendation would be, we set up an education committee that meets, if it only meets twice a year, to be brought up to date with educational issues, particularly with reference to our looked after children. We are effectively the parents of those children, and we should be monitoring what they're doing.
I think it's about communication as well, isn't it? We need more communications and more information, but in an easy, digestible style, whether it's a seminar or whether it's an all-member meeting or regular briefings. I think we're all sort of asking for more information like that.
Yeah, I'll formulate those
I'll
and
send them
email
out.
those round to you for approval before they get sent out.
Okay. So, agenda item 6, the School Standards Monitoring Subcommittee Update Report. You can see there on the following pages the reports of the visits that we made actually to the schools. We've got Henry's Church in Wales, Green Meadow, Ganteg, and Lantarnham Community Primary. So we'd just like to go through them page by page. This is the report of the visit to Henker School.
I am extremely concerned that recommendation 3, the subcommittee expressed concerns that the cost of procuring IT equipment from the SRS or services from neighbourhood services are almost always much more expensive than procuring from private companies. However, schools do not always have the time or opportunity to research alternative supplies. And the response, chief officers have investigated and consulted with the head teacher on this matter. That doesn't tell me anything. What have they done? They've said to the head teacher, who brought this to our attention, by the way,
Yeah, there was feedback
this is the problem.
from the head of the SRS. He spoke to the head teacher and she confirmed that it was more an issue with grounds maintenance rather than IT issues. So I'm still in the process of going through that with neighbourhood services. So that is an ongoing recommendation at the moment.
The teacher was actually specific about, I mean, she was complaining about the school, but about the grounds maintenance, but she was specific about IT services as well. I mean, if she's gone back on that, well, that's fine, we have to live with it.
Subcommittee were assured of the transition plans are in place to prepare for the intake of pupils following the closure of Victoria Village School and Brinteg Nursery. However, the committee would like to offer our support and assistance to the head should any issues or problems arise throughout the process or after. I think after the comments that Councillor Tu made previously, maybe we should perhaps send a memo to the executive member to ask that the parents of Victoria Village School be made quite clear to them about the transport arrangement, because the term's ticking on now and they really need to be assured that the transport is being sorted for them.
Check, could I also add maybe
Dr. Sheridan,
we could add that the arrangements for hopeful redeployment of most of the staff to Garteg, which is where most of the children are going, I believe. Is that correct? to get a report back on that as well, because obviously I'm trying to deal with that as well in terms of
Could we?
trying to avoid compulsory redundancies and the cost to the authority.
Yeah, I am a
Can see how busy we've been.
I am a governor on Green Meadow, but obviously I wasn't in attendance this because it was prior to me being placed on the...
Okay, we take a declaration of interest on that. And we've had the issue there of class sizes, which we brought up there.
I'm reasonably happy with it, Chair, on Green Meadow, because they've had their Estin inspection and now they've got another teacher in place. I am more worried about that issue at Lantarnham because they haven't had their inspection. That inspection is still due, and it's ticked in the noted for future consideration box.
The Green Meadow, we're happy with the Green Meadow. Councillor Lantarnham went, okay, if you'd like to...
Yes, that recommendation is in the same box as it is for Green Meadow. They're going to have an inspection. They're going to get marked down because they're going to class oversize, and then we're going to have to put a teacher in. My suggestion is, I mean, I think that the authority shouldn't have ticked it in that box. They should have ticked it in the accepted box and talked to the school about a managed deficit, because they definitely need that teacher. They definitely need another. My feeling from having, I mean, maybe the head doesn't feel as strongly about it as I do, and in which case, you know. But it really worries me that school will now go into an Estin inspection and be marked down because it's got 35 in a class, and it may even be more than 35 right now because we went there several months ago and they're still building there. And that school is going to be marked down. And, you know, they're going to be marked down in Estin inspection. It's not their fault. There's nothing they can do about it.
Chair, I strange as if I was there this morning on another issue, but it's still an issue for the head teacher because it came up in our conversation, and there was a cluster of 37 until recently.
Well, it's gone up there.
I think they've managed to take it back down a couple, but there's still an issue for that.
And absolutely, these were your recommendations, so if you're not satisfied with the response, you're perfectly entitled to go back again with comments to the exec members, so I'll include those back.
Yeah, my view is this needs a bit more of an urgency about it than to tick that box because of the likelihood of an Estin inspection at any time.
The issues in a few schools is that obviously they're fighting with their budgets. Yes. And then they have increased in numbers in certain classes, whereas they're looking to make staff redundant, but at the same time they need extra staffing. So it's a very difficult situation for school governors to actually, monitor the budget to actually achieve all the outcomes that they're looking for. So one hand they're trying to look at the budget and keep in within the budget, and the other hand that means depleting their school staff, but on the other hand they've got a high number of children in another class where they need to increase the staff. So it's just...
I can understand what the LEA response is. Basically they're saying there's Welsh Government funding that's in place for 4 years from 17 to 21. And our schools are already, some of our schools are already receiving the funding. Well, yeah, that's great, lovely. But it doesn't help Lantarnham at this moment in time. So I think we need urgently to look at that.
What schools have the extra funding as well and how they would compare with Green Meadow and Lantarnham.
Thank you, Chair. The next meeting will be the visioning session back in the summer. Once those dates have been set, we will send those around to members.
Okay. just say this is the last meeting of this cycle of the Learning Community Scrutiny Committee. We'll be starting a new sort of council year in the next few weeks. I'd like to thank everybody for their support during the year, all the work that they've done, and thank you very much.